So I'm Simon. I work at GE Digital. And they really asked me to come here and talk about the digital transformation that we're going through at GE and share with you some of the lessons learned. So just, if you have any questions as we go through as well, just feel free to put your hands up. So, I don't know, maybe just a show of hands, everyone knows GE here? Okay. So, when I joined GE 8 years ago, I thought, it's a company that's going to last forever, right? $150 billion of annual revenue, $300 billion market capitalization. And we're really just in most of the major big heavy-duty industries. And, we have a footprint that really matches that. So think, 300,000 employees operating in over 150 countries worldwide. That's what I always expected is the type of infrastructure you'd need to have in a company this big. And over the past few years, I think we've found that that's not necessarily true. So Airbnb has more rooms available to consumers than any hotel chains today. Apple sells you an iPhone, and then 1 million plus developers build applications that they then sell directly to you through that platform, and Apple then takes a cut. Uber defied all regulation when it started its operations, and now it's one of the biggest logistics firms in the world. So with that as the context, we realized that software could disrupt every one of our industries as well, and so we realized we had to do something about it. So just maybe tell you a quick story. So I moved into a new apartment in San Francisco recently, and I purchased a Nest thermostat for $250. That now optimizes my electricity consumption in my home. Pacific Gas and Electricity now make less money. Another example, in my car, I purchased a chip for $100. It connects my car to my iPhone, and it allows me to optimize how I'm driving the car, my fuel consumption, and when I need to take it in for checkups with the manufacturer. Effectively, the manufacturer now makes less money from me owning that car. And then we looked at our own equipment and we said, well, look, a wind turbine is producing 10 million terabytes a day. And what are we doing with that data? Because if someone else captures it, they can unlock value that then takes us out of the equation. And so that's why we formed GE Digital. So if we take a step back, when you look at a traditional industry, it's really a few key components. So IT was always viewed as back office, the ERP, those systems that no one needs to know about, but they just hope work. We're always striving for perfection with our products. Once you release it, it's done. Then you release the next version. We're very much focused on CapEx, upfront cost that's sunk. You probably all know these big waterfall projects. You spend all these times defining your requirements. You then implement, you spend all this time doing the validation, and then it gets put to one side. That's really being turned on its head through software. Now, instead of IT, it's OT. How are you connecting your machines to the internet and deriving value from it? It's all about outcomes and speed. I don't know if anyone's read The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, but I definitely recommend you do. There he talks about minimally viable products. How are you putting something out into the marketplace and testing and learning and adapting? And with software, you can continue to push out new updates and continue to evolve based on the value you're driving for the customer. And it becomes a lot more of an OpEx model. So instead of that big cash outflow at the beginning of a project, now it's cash outflow throughout the duration, and you expect value creation throughout that process. So if we take a step back, in October last year, we looked at GE and we found there were 4,000 employees working on software in some kind of capacity. They were all doing that independently. It was fragmented, and we were getting no scale from it. And so what we did back in 2011 is we created the Software COE, and this is just really an incubator for software excellence that was based out in Silicon Valley. And so we used that as the basis for our new digital platform, where we combined corporate IT, we combined software engineers across all the businesses and this software center of excellence to create GE Digital. And really, there's a couple of key benefits to that. Software engineers work well in small teams that are connected to the customer's problems. And so when you think about how GE works, we probably have 8 layers between a software engineer and the CEO. How connected do you really feel to a mission? And so by pulling everyone together into a common business unit, I think people realize now what that mission is. Plus, we're able to drive scale. So we heard a lot about Watson recently. We have a similar product, Predix. We have products that are going out into all these industries, and we realized that we could have a common infrastructure to support all of them. And that's our Predix platform. And then GE as a digital company, every single one of our business units now has a digital component. Every CEO within our company has digital revenue targets. And so this is really a transformation of the entire business. So we had quite a hefty target. So we're going to go to $15 billion in revenue by 2020. And what's interesting is how you start to think about breaking that down. So we really see it as 3 key areas as how you can derive value from software products. The first is creating outcomes for your customers. So I'll talk you through a couple of examples, aviation being a good one. But really, the thing you have to remember when it comes to looking at technology, and so I live out in Silicon Valley, and there's like a startup in every building. It's all about the outcomes. It's fine to see cool things, but unless you're able to actually tie that back to the financials for your customers, it doesn't mean anything. And so outcomes are the biggest thing that we're trying to drive towards, and that's apps. So when you hear platforms, you hear ecosystems, if you're not hearing applications and outcomes, it's all smoke and mirrors. Now, by connecting all of our assets to this one platform, we realized that we now have a platform that we can sell. And so, I gave you that example of connecting this wind farm to our industrial Internet of Things platform. Wouldn't it be great if anyone could develop an application on top of that platform? So effectively, it becomes the Apple model whereby, we're providing access to the platform, to the equipment. Other people are developing applications and selling those on to our customers, and we take a cut. But not only our equipment, so we're working with Pitney Bowes, we're working with Toshiba, we're working with all these customers, all these companies, I should say, and we're forming the backbone for their IoT platform. So think of it as, AWS. I'm sure most people are familiar with Amazon Web Services, but designed for the Internet of Things. So there are things you have to consider, like the amount of data that's flowing through there, how you're building an analytics platform on top of there, how you're providing a security infrastructure, because we all know that data leakages are going to be a huge problem in the future. And so we see a lot of revenue coming from the platform and the ecosystem there. And then finally, internal productivity. The thing we realized is, we have these manufacturing operations in 150 countries in the world. If we're not able to sensor enable the equipment in our own factories and demonstrate that we're able to create outcomes for ourselves, how can we sell it to a customer? So those are the 3 buckets. And look, we talked a little bit about the things on the left-hand side, but it really comes down to Predix and APM. So we have a killer app. And if you're interested in moving into a digital evolution for your own company, I would definitely study the Salesforce model. What Salesforce did is they started with a single app, and they did it really well. Gartner actually just voted Salesforce's Sales Cloud as the #1 CRM in the world. They start with one app. You get successful with that one app. You branch out into more applications, and then you expose a platform. Trying to drive a platform play from the beginning is futile. And then digital DNA. I think this is an important one, and it's how do you really drive a culture of innovation and digital fluency in your workforce. There are really easy ways to do that. Galvanize is a company that's up and coming in the US right now. There you can drop out of any career, spend $12,000, and in 4 months, you'll be equipped with all the tools you need to be a data scientist, and you will get a job at Uber, Google, Facebook, making hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's 4 months education. So if that's possible for anyone, how are we enabling our own teams through our own learning and training curriculums? So the first, we just talked about challenging, existing business models. The second is innovating new business models. So as a company, GE spent a lot of time looking at these big names behind me right now. And there seems to be a common trend in all of them that I'll walk you through. You start with customer demographics, right? You look at the Amazon model. 15 years ago, they were saying males between the ages of 20 and 25 are likely to purchase some kind of component related to video games. That's demographics. But then you've got to move to psychographics. This is where you put context around the data. So this is where you start to understand people's behaviors, people's intent. And so now you can start to become a lot more predictive with those outcomes. So let's see an example. Instead of the segmentation we talked about, now you move to this concept of P&L of one. Next time you go on Amazon, look at what they're recommending to you. It is very targeted. It's based on what you've looked at before. It's based on what you've purchased before. It's actually even based on who you've purchased before. And they start to build a catalog of, are you purchasing things for your mother around her birthday? And then it also looks at people similar to you and what they purchased, and then makes recommendations. There is open source software today that allows you to do the same kind of analytics for your own customer base. I think the gentleman from Watson has already left, so you don't need to invest millions of dollars to do this. You just have to have a clear use case. And then you look at the evolution of what Amazon really did. They started as a bookstore. They learned something about the customers. Then they became an open marketplace. They started learning more about customers. And now they're tailoring it. Now they're looking at music and video services. They're looking at web services. The whole time, they're not just providing you with services, you're providing them with your data. It's not just Amazon. Look at Apple. Apple started with, PCs. They moved into mobile devices. Now they know my health through my watch. Same with Google. Google's able to tell me exactly what I'm interested in purchasing through their targeted ads because they're reading every one of my emails. So if data is key, what are you going to do about it? So in the industries that we operate in GE, we realized that either we have to help customers derive value from their data or someone else will. That actually means cannibalizing our other business lines. So if I'm going to allow my customer to be more productive with their equipment, I'm probably going to make less money from them in the aftermarket. So that's why I really need to capture that value for myself. So here's an example. So about 50% of all of the jet engines that power commercial aircraft and military aircraft are powered by GE engines. And historically, we've had kind of rudimentary ways of modeling those aircraft. When did you buy the engine? What was the engine version? Okay, you probably need to bring it in after 5 years for a service. Now I can look at how is the pilot flying the aircraft? What are the conditions they're flying it in? How frequently are you flying it? Customizing the service plan for that specific engine. So now, instead of fleet analytics, I'm back to this whole concept of P&L of one. And I need to make sure that I'm actually capitalizing on every single one of those assets individually instead of looking at the entire portfolio. So on the left-hand side is our existing product lines. We're kind of the Gillette model, if you will. I sell a piece of equipment, relatively cheaper than I could do, and then I capitalize on the aftermarket through high-end services contracts. It's like when you buy a Gillette razor, you pay $5 for one blade, and then you end up paying $20 every time you want a new blade. With our new digital model, we've effectively created what we're calling the digital twin. What if I was able to take that piece of equipment, take all the data coming off that equipment, and model it in Predix? So there you need a couple of things. You know, I actually think Watson is a great product, but it's predicated on you having the data. So how are you getting the data from all your equipment into the cloud, enabling you to perform the analytics in the first place? That's where you need control systems. You need an infrastructure that allows you to have redundancy in case of latency of communication with the cloud. So you're going to need some kind of on-prem analytics capabilities as well. And so that's all encapsulated within our platform, Predix. So I'll walk you through a real example. So this is the G90. It's probably our most successful engine line ever. And we actually got pretty sophisticated as to how we would model them. So when we sell a jet engine, we sell it to the airlines with effectively an insurance contract. And there's some, risk factors that you bake into it. Are they going to be flying it in North America, Latin America, Europe, Middle East? We had one customer come to us, and the engine was failing at a frequency we weren't expecting. And it was because of the high-pressure turbine stage 1 blade. It's basically the most extreme condition within the engine. And we said, well, we don't know why. So this is where I think, as industrial companies, you are differentiated from those pure play software companies in the valley. It's because you understand your equipment. So what we did is we modeled the equipment in Predix, and then we started feeding in all the real-world data into this physics-based model. And what we found is that the sand in the Qatari desert is of a slightly different granularity of elsewhere in the Middle East that was causing increased temperatures within the engine that was causing the stage 1 blade to need to be fixed more frequently. So we were able to customize an inspection frequency for that single customer, saving them hundreds of millions of dollars. That's the power of analytics. That's the power of the P&L of one. So I think the other thing we realized as we went through the journey is talent needs to change. So 8 years ago, I was a software engineer in aviation. And you were kind of like a third-class citizen at that point. It was the mechanical engineers, then the power systems engineers, and then the lowly software engineers. And I think what we're finding today is you actually now need a blend of both. You need those software engineers working with your hardware engineers to design the control systems to pick up the right sets of data to transmit to your cloud. I love this statistic. Today, there are 300,000 IoT developers in the world. By 2020, they project we will need 4.5 million. But they don't think we'll have that many. So the competition is going to be huge. And so how do you incentivize people to come and want to work in your company working on IoT problems? And finally, the competition. Regardless of what anyone tells you, and I'll be totally honest, thinking about things like IoT is actually still very new. It's easy when you want to think about like a Fitbit or something that's designed for consumers that transmits data to the cloud. You know, Nest is a very kind of constrained and confined use case. But actually connecting all of your hardware today, no one's really figured it out. We're kind of trailblazing, if you will. But that'll change. Soon, everyone will be trying to do what we're trying to do. And so I think what's important is to build an ecosystem of partners. You won't be able to do everything you need to do in order to build an IoT platform and analytics on top of it. The reality is you don't need to, nor should you. And so this whole concept of supplementing your own workforce through a partner network is hugely important. It means you have to effectively completely redesign your workforce. And so one of the things we're grappling with right now is, do you retrain your existing employees? Do you bring in new employees with the skill set you're looking for? Or a combination of the both? And finally, we talked a little bit about Salesforce. So Salesforce makes $6.5 billion a year. They've been around for 15 years. Last year, they lost money, 10 cents per share. Yet they have a market capitalization of $60 billion. In GE, if we ever told the CEO that we were losing money, yet still think we should be paid our bonus, I mean, he'd definitely laugh us out of the room, but probably more likely fire us. So you need to completely rethink, how do you measure the success of these innovations and these digital plays? We have a leading indicator approach. So what we did is we defined a strategy for GE Digital. It's predicated on platform consumption. But before you even measure platform consumption, you've got to measure how many people are even using the thing. And then you look at how much are they using it. And then you look at, is it profitable? So this whole concept of leading indicators is how they think about it from a VC perspective. And I really encourage you to think about each of the innovations that I'm sure everyone's going to walk away thinking about, and how do you measure success? So these are the 4 takeaways we have, and these are the 4 principles that we're looking at as it relates to our digital play. Challenge the old ways. I think, going to look at Singularity and some of these other think tanks is really a great way for you to go back to your own companies and help them think differently. The reality is if you don't innovate, someone's going to innovate around you, and you'll become commoditized, and that's the biggest risk. Then it's innovating new business models. I really think the large consumer internet companies have done a great job, and we talked about it, Amazon, Apple, Google. You keep seeing them, Facebook. I now get more news content from Facebook than I do from any traditional media outlet. That means I use Facebook more often. That means they get more data about me. The data's key. The skill sets, if you try and do any of this with the people you have today, you will fail. You either need to partner or you need to bring people in. And there are really easy ways to build proof of concepts. HourlyNerd.com is a great example. So a year ago, we went to hourlynerd.com. Is anyone here in shared services or BPOs or outsourcing? Okay, so we have a really large shared service organization, about 6,000 people. And what we've struggled with is T&L fraud, travel and living expenses. So we'd always do these analytics where we'd say, okay, these are the population we want to go look at, and they end up being people that spend the most per meal or people that have a higher spend on whatever. And it always ends out that they're a salesperson taking a customer out for dinner, or they're a senior executive and they're authorized to do it. And so we never found anything. We went to hourlynerd.com, which effectively puts you in contact directly with consultants, independent consultants. We spent, I don't know, a few $1,000s on a proof of concept, and we got this data scientist with a background in MIT who built a regression tree for us. We had an 80% hit rate on identification of fraudulent transactions in our T&L. If you need proof points to go back to your own company with, this is a really cheap option. And then measuring success differently. Again, I would look through investor pitches for some of the hot startups. Look through how VCs are investing in their companies. And I think you'll learn a lot there. And that's our bridge. I'll say it again, like, it looks so slick when you see people up on stage talking about these amazing use cases, but the reality is no one's actually accomplished what it is you're trying to do. And so I would just say, take a leap. If nothing else, you'll learn a ton. And that's what we've done. So Santiago said that we probably have time for questions, so I'd love to get your thoughts on what it is you're trying to accomplish. And yeah, you can shout. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for your presentation. And you mentioned that part of the new strategy includes a different mindset, a different understanding of how do you work, or how do you see your competition. I understood that there is a different approach from your side. If so, could you please give us certain examples about it? I mean, where are you working with, or how, in which way are you working with your competition?
Working with the competition?
Not exactly working, but you just see there is a different approach of how do you perceive your competition. What is that about?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, our competitors that you would see in our growth playbook, which is our strategy sessions we do with the chairman, it was Siemens, IBM, Rolls-Royce. Today, it's any kid sitting in his garage with a PC. That's the threat, right? Like the example I gave you of my car, it's automatic.com is where I purchased this sensor. I stuck it in my GMC car. And now I've bypassed the need for GMC to ever provide connectivity in that car, and instead Automatic's getting all the value. And you know what they're actually doing? I paid $100 and I get some cool analytics on my phone. They're actually selling my data to municipalities, and they're showing where people are driving around the city of San Francisco. They're showing how fast they're going. They're showing where there's a higher frequency of accidents. That is all data that GMC could have got directly themselves and sold it themselves. It would have been a whole new business model for them, but they never thought about it. And so now they're out of it completely. And so then you look at Tesla. Right? Tesla came out of nowhere, and they put out a substandard product in the first generation. But here's what they did. They had the foresight to put sensors everywhere in the car. And so, I forget the exact specifics, but it was something like the suspension was too high on the car. And so they actually were required to do a full product recall of all Teslas. Instead, what they were able to do was push over the wire an update to the software that automatically slightly lowered the suspension overnight without anyone knowing, avoiding millions and millions and millions of dollars of cost. You know, so like, that's amazing foresight. The whole, they have this insane mode. It just showed up one day. Self-driving cars. Every Tesla driver woke up one day and its car was self-driving. And so that allows them to compete with the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world who would tell you that, you know, in 20 years from now, people won't even need to own cars. So I think I really do stress that the data is key, and he who controls the data controls the value stream. And that could be anyone. Yeah.
So again, thank you for the presentation. My question is, how are you dealing in the company with the cultural change? So I believe that you need to have some different skills. The people need to have different skills inside the company. They need to start thinking differently. So how GE is managing that inside the company? That's my question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's what we did. And it's not perfect, so I'll get to some of the challenges associated with what we did. In 2011, we opened up the software research center in the Bay Area, in San Francisco. We brought in Bill Rue, who is the former VP of sales for Cisco, and he basically pulled in a team of software leaders from the Valley. So we have our VP of engineering was one of the first employees at Microsoft. He owned the whole of the Microsoft's mobile product line. We have someone from Business Objects who led Business Objects, salespeople from Red Hat and other software companies, Oracle. And so we then just had this huge influx of thousands of employees who had no GE legacy. Right, so GE's always been this company where you join when you leave school and you stay there for life. That's not the way anymore. Now we're hiring people in, and the reality is most people in that specific domain will leave after 3 years. They'll accomplish something, they'll get a better offer somewhere else, and they'll move on. So we did that. So that was 2011, and at that point we committed to investing $1 billion. And then last year we basically combined that with our industrial businesses. And so I was one of the first employees there. So I'm, a GE lifer, going over there. And so that melting pot of industrial plus digital, like we're doing it with people. And we have them sitting next to each other. And they use a concept called pair programming. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. It was invented by Pivotal Labs. And effectively, you have 2 screens, 2 people standing next to each other, 2 monitors, 1 keyboard, 1 mouse. Right, so you eliminate this whole QA process at the end, but effectively 1 person is watching the other one code and come up with solutions, then they switch and the other person watches them. And so that is a great way to infuse knowledge from both sides. It's not without its challenges though. I think software engineers in the Valley feel like they can solve any problem with a line of code. And the reality is there's a whole customer change management process that's required, and the realities of dealing in some heavily regulated industries with a reputation like GE that we can't avoid. And so there is a friction there, I would say, and it manifests itself probably too frequently. and not always as constructively as it should, but that's the change that we're going through. I don't know if that answered your question. The other thing we did is we completely revised our leadership programs. So now every graduate leadership program within GE has a component of digital curriculum. Everyone's expected to understand digital business models, software business models, pricing. How you price a software product is very different than how we priced anything else before. In fact, how you price software today is very different than how you priced software 2 years ago. It's gone from this perpetual license to a subscription basis. Any other questions? Yeah.
So much of the model today relies on the ability to collect and extract actionable insight from data instantaneously. Have any of these businesses been impacted by countries' requirements that you store data locally or prohibitions on the movement of data across nations?
I probably spend 3 hours of every day dealing with data sovereignty issues. Yes. So we did this analysis with a broad brush. Only China and Russia actually have laws that prohibit you from using a public cloud. However, then it gets very nuanced very quickly. So personally identifiable information in the healthcare space. Aviation, a lot of the equipment is deemed military grade, and so you deal with ITAR and export controls. So those nuances come in quickly in terms of the type of data. And then you just have customer behavior that you have to deal with. So there seems to be a huge, I think actually the fear stems from statements like whoever controls the data controls the value. And I think our customers realize that they need to be able to control their data on premise. And so what we've done is we've developed an infrastructure. Actually, let me start with an example and then explain the infrastructure. So let's say we put analytics for a train, right? A locomotive. We have a locomotive business. And so the locomotive communicates back to the cloud, and it tells you where the train is at all given times, and you can help it optimize its speed. What if it goes into a tunnel? You lose connectivity. And so there's a component of this on-prem or on-premise that exists on the equipment itself. The equipment needs to perform analytics on a small scale. And so really, if you take that concept and you scale it, so you can now have a little bit more of the analytics being performed on the customer's site. There'll be some more heavy-duty stuff that you can provide them with an in-country solution. And then there's going to be some processing that you need that whole cloud infrastructure to really do to get the scale. But the amount of data, the amount of the actual customer's data you've needed to send to them at that point can be reduced dramatically. And so the idea of where is the compute actually taking place in that chain is something that we're really investing heavily in as a concept. And I think it's resonating with customers. And then just like, if you can explain the value, so you're an airline and you want to connect your aircraft engines. Well, I can do some great analytics for you. But if all of you were airlines and you all provided your data and I put that all in the cloud and ran the analytics there, you'd all benefit from that exponentially because there's a far greater data set. And so that as a value proposition is also another approach you can take. Any other questions? Cool. Well, hopefully that was useful. I'll be around later today. Thanks.